What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Thanks for joining me for today's live stream where we are going to attempt the impossible by picking the 10 best vampire films from the countless horror classics, cult classics, art house masterpieces, softcore erotic films, all this stuff from the last 100 years going all the way back to Nosferatu. And the catalyst for the stream is the upcoming release of The Last Voyage of Demeter, a movie that has been in development hell for basically 20 years, going all the way back to another lifetime for me when I was a reader at Phoenix Pictures, where I was writing coverage on scripts and books. And way back then in the early 2000s, I read a couple of drafts of that script. And here we are in 2023, where that movie is finally reaching the screen. And I'm honestly just kind of fascinated or kind of, I don't know, just mesmerized by the idea of what will 20 years of development look like, because from the trailer it looked more or less the exact same as those early drafts that I read. And for people who don't know what I'm talking about, The Last Voyage of the Demeter is based on a couple of pages from Bram Stoker's Dracula, a chapter called Log of the Demeter Varna to Whitby, which is actually the title used by Coppola in his movie. But it's just a couple pages, and it's from from the point of view of a log of a captain as Dracula is slowly but surely picking off the crew. And there's a little bit beforehand that could be pulled in as like a framing device, but it's not a lot of material to work with. But I have very low expectations for the movie. It looks generic. It looks like it has no style, no flavor. And we've already seen the Demeter storyline adapted many times. The Dracula from 1979, that movie starts on the Demeter. Nosferatu from 2022 gives us a great version of the Voyage of the Demeter. And of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 92 has a great version with Anthony Hopkins providing voiceover narration. And even Mel Brooks got in on the action featuring the Demeter in his satire, Dracula Dead and Loving It. But I'm hoping over the course of this conversation, I'll get some great recommendations from y'all. You'll get some great recommendations from me. And we'll slowly but surely kind of zero in on what makes a great vampire movie really work. And before I go any further, maybe I should just check and see how my audio is, because my last solo live stream, the audio was total garbage for the first 30 minutes, and I'm hell-bent upon not having a similar problem today. So y'all tell me in the chat if my audio is sounding like shit or not. And yeah, the earlier the warning, the better. But for now, I'm just going to continue as if everything is okay. But a ton of modern writers have given us great vampire stories, like Richard Matheson and Stephen King. And I've got my copy of Salem's Lot right here. But obviously, people have been writing vampire stories as in a novel form since the 19th century. And one of these days, I will read Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. It's been on my to-do list for a long time. And then, of course, you have all the Slavic folklore going back to who knows when. I took a vampire class at the University of Virginia, which was a mix of fiction and movies and Slavic folklore. And a lot of those myths and legends have been basically ignored by movies, apart from a few exceptions. But I mean, these stories go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Who the hell knows when people first started talking about vampires? But my fascination started early on. My older brother and I saw the Tobe Hooper adaptation of Salem's Lot on TV, and we were transfixed. And we were fucking petrified. And some of my favorite horror memories are from that first experience. My older brother, his mind got so broken by the experience for days, if not weeks. He was making little crosses out of toothpicks because he thought our neighbor, Randy Morchower, was going to come knock on the window one night and try to get him. I don't know if my older brother ever recovered. And he's almost 50 and he's still talking about vampires. He's still obsessed. But for me, my favorite vampire movies are the ones where like the act of feeding seems almost like a mix of like sex and drugs and alcohol and like everything kind of rolled into one. I mean, I can get into the ones where vampires are more like kind of like a creature of like the natural world, which is kind of how Nosferatu goes. But I much prefer it when it just seems like they're like rock stars or outlaws or whatever the case might be. And they're just partying their faces off. And that's probably because I grew up in the 80s where we got a lot of horror movies or a lot of vampire movies that leaned into that. And as kind of like a dirty old man, I obviously love the erotic vampire movies. But for me, to be a good one, it can't just be softcore porn. Like the horror ingredients and the erotic ingredients have to be kind of in equal measure. And of course, I enjoy a good comedy satire and that sort of thing. But before I get to my honorable mentions, the movies that I've yet to see, and before I get to my official top 10 list, I do want to do a few questions from Twitter and YouTube that I received in advance. But I'm just going to check. I'm checking the commentary. Ben Smith writes, okay, don't kill me. I've never seen Lost Boys. I'm worried it won't hold up. Should I see it? I would say yes. I mean, it would have been better if you'd seen it at age 11 in 1987, which is when I saw it. And I was just totally entranced. I have a feeling that you would still like it. I've met some girls in their early, like mid-20s where they like it because of all the hot guys. And they're all dressed like rock stars with like leather coats and spiked hair and earrings and that sort of thing. I think it's the closest we're ever going to come to like an 80s hairband version of a vampire story. So I think it's well worth a watch. And I think it's probably Joel Schumacher's best movie. Yeah, probably his best movie. Pause says, sounds good. And K Fit says, audio sounds great today. All right. Well, then we won't talk about the audio anymore. We'll just power on. So let's get to some of the questions from Twitter and then YouTube, and then we'll just dive right in. At Tokyo Spark from Twitter writes, not for everyone, but Near Dark has got to be up there. Rest assured, Tokyo Spark, Near Dark will be coming up over the course of this conversation. Chris Schweizer, aka at Schweizer Comics on Twitter writes, looking forward to hearing your picks. I have guesses. There's some gimmies, but I'm curious what the dark horses might be, if there are any. The Hunger, Night Flyer, Mr. Vampire. I've got my dark horses. I've got some obscure classics. I mean, I've got some really obscure classics like Blood Spattered Bride, which I just saw in my honorable mentions. But with the vampire genre, I mean, it's not even a genre, but in the vampire kind of subgenre, I don't know how many movies have been made. Hundreds, thousands. There's so many obscure films still to be discovered. And so obviously we're not going to get to all of them because we're talking about 100 years of movies. There are probably as many vampire movies as there are superhero movies or Westerns, or actually, I don't know. It's got to be, in terms of subgenres, one of the most beloved types of stories out there imaginable. But on my YouTube questions, Dr. Zane Robe 2548 writes, I've seen them all. Good topic, James. The best has to be Midnight Mass by Mike Flanagan. The question is, does this qualify as a 7-hour movie, or is it not allowed to be with those that go for an hour and a half? I feel it holds up against all the others' thoughts. I agree. I thought Midnight Mass was fucking awesome. It's one of the best shows of the last couple of years, and I think it's Mike Flanagan's finest hour as a storyteller. I don't know why I draw a very clear dividing line between shows and movies. I feel like a movie is a standalone experience and a show is a show, and you can watch it as a big movie. Like, is David Lynch's Twin Peaks: The Return just like a 17-hour movie? I guess. I mean, the definition has gotten increasingly blurry. But for me, a show is something that's serialized, and a movie is one story. So I would still regard Midnight Mass as a show, even if it has all the artistry and all the superb storytelling of a great flick. And I thought it just was incredible. I thought it blew The Haunting of Hill House right out of the water. And Mike Flanagan will go to his grave with that probably still being his best work. John Smith writes, hope to see Park Chan-wook's Thirst and Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day on here. They're in my honorable mentions, and they're incredible. I mean, Park Chan-wook, my favorite's still Old Boy, but he's directed a ton of kick-ass flicks at this point, like that was The Handmaiden a couple of years ago, was really good. But Claire Denis, Trouble Every Day. If you like your horror films to be gritty and realistic and to traumatize you right down to the core of your soul, check out Trouble Every Day. And I mean, it will leave some legit emotional scars on you. Just the trailer, hearing some of the screams in the background, it's really intense. So I strongly, if your taste in horror or vampires leans to the art house side of things, definitely give Claire Denis' film a go. I think that's her best movie. But a lot of people who love Claire Denis hate Trouble Every Day. It's so fucking disturbing. But Mark A, aka at Mark A 5883 writes, I'm hoping the Twilight Saga doesn't make your top 10. It will not. It wasn't even going to make the live stream until you mentioned it. I forget the name, but the one with Leslie Nielsen playing Drac was hilarious. Lost Boys for number 1. Leslie Nielsen, Dracula Dead and Loving It. I mean, is that as good as Young Frankenstein? Hell no. But every Mel Brooks movie is worth seeing. Lost Boys is not my number 1, but it's definitely in my top 10. So stay tuned. At Egg Plantman 21 writes, fuck yeah, Fright Night is a classic. I agree. That was the movie, that was the turning point for me where vampire movies went from being petrifying to being cool. And I had a bootleg VHS cassette of Fright Night, and I watched it 200 times. I mean, I wore it out. That was the first time I really enjoyed a vampire movie. And that's what really got me obsessed. And the last question is from at Hall King 7441. This could be a top 100 list. Yeah, truer words were never spoken. I mean, we quite literally are talking about over 100 years of good movies to choose from. And the list of directors who have taken a crack at these stories includes F.W. Murnau, Todd Browning, Carl Theodor Dreyer, Terrence Fisher, Roman Polanski, George A. Romero, Tobe Hooper, Werner Herzog, speaking of which, Tony Scott, Catherine Bigelow, Francis Ford Coppola, John Carpenter, Park Chan-wook, and many, many, many more. And I have a feeling that as long as people are telling stories in a visual format, whether it's TV, film, or video games or whatever, vampire stories are going to be part of the equation. But let me just have a quick look at the chat and make sure I'm not bleeding from the gums or anything strange that's that needs to be called attention to. Oh, Boys in the Lab, Vampire Hunter D. Thank you for the reminder. Vampire Hunter D is one of my all-time favorite cartoons from any era, from any country. And for whatever reason, as I was putting together my list, animation didn't even pop into my brain. So I might have to come back and just do one of these about anime. Because Vampire Hunter D, in terms of combining sci-fi, horror, like dystopian futures, little small dose of erotica, and just kick-ass characters. That was my gateway drug to really getting obsessed with Japanese animation. Even before I saw Akira, I was totally obsessed with Vampire Hunter D. Fucking rules. And I enjoy Bloodlust, but it's the original that I really like. Fred Schaefer writes, Twilight equals Puke City. I only saw the first, so I cannot speak to the entire franchise. But sorry, vampires should, like, my impression of that first movie was that it was a vampire story for people who enjoy chaste, like sexless romances, and ideally romances where you have a couple of suitors pursuing you all at once. And obviously those actors went on to do much better work later on. I mean, Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson are two of the best actors out there and have great taste in directors. But yeah, not to worry. Twilight will not come up again for the rest of the live stream. So let's get into some honorable mentions, stuff that will not be making the list. And I don't want this live stream just to be me reading off titles, because that's not much of a live stream. But I do need to give some shout outs, especially for people out there who enjoy the saucy stuff. Hammer Horror, they've made a lot of great horror movies and a lot of great vampire movies, but the Karnstein trilogy, which includes The Vampire Lovers, Lust for a Vampire, and Twins of Evil, well worth a look. I mean, Twins of Evil stars actual twins who were nude and Playboy together. You can't beat that. I mean, Hammer Horror, someone said once, all you need is blood, boobs, and a great title, and you've got a Hammer Horror film. That kind of sums things up. Daughters of Darkness, it almost made my top 10. That's incredible. Embrace of the Vampire, the Alyssa Milano, if you really want to go the softcore route. Dracula 3D by Dario Argento. And then Jean Rollin and Jess Franco did a ton. Like Jean Rollin did Nude Vampire, Requiem for a Vampire, Shiver of the Vampire, Lips of Blood, Fascination. I really like Fascination. The Rape of the Vampire, Naughty Naughty. And yeah, all those are worth hunting down. Jean Rollin would do some kind of porn films to pay the bills, but also did a ton of really cool, atmospheric, stylish horror films in the 70s and 80s. Life Force by Tobe Hooper. If you count space vampires, got to go with Life Force. Vampiros Lesbos by Jess Franco. And of course, Female Vampire, aka The Bare-Breasted Countess from 1973, with Lena Romay dry humping a pillow in one of the most erotic sequences in the history of the horror genre. But if you want to go art house, as I mentioned before, Trouble Every Day. If you want some folklore, if you want to get back to the roots, kind of Slavic folklore, Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. High five to Martin Kessler for reminding me of that. We did a podcast about that years ago. If you want to go full-blown kick-ass like art house masterpieces, Vampire from 1932 by Carl Theodor Dreyer. He's more famous for The Passion of Joan of Arc and Ordette and things like that, but Vampire, it's astonishing. The Thirst by Park Chan-wook, and Guy Madden's Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary, if you want to go into some ballet. And the rest I'm just going to rattle off. John Carpenter's Vampires, Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot, George A. Romero's Martin, Guillermo del Toro's Kronos, obviously What We Do in the Shadows and all of its various iterations, John Landis's Innocent Blood, Interview with the Vampire. Listen to the book on tape, but I still need to read that book, but Neil Jordan nailed it. From Dusk Till Dawn, saw it several times in the theater. Abel Ferrara's The Addiction, Blood Spattered Bride, which Quentin Tarantino really likes, and of course, Let the Right One In, which was remade immediately as Let Me In. I prefer Let the Right One In. Your mileage may vary, but I think when in doubt, if you've got a kick-ass foreign film that works well, don't immediately do an English language remake for people who refuse to read subtitles. I feel like you're playing to the lowest common denominator. However, Matt Reeves clearly made Let Me In with a lot of love and reverence for the original film. And last but not least, in my honorable mentions, thanks to Dan Pullen, we've got one actual porn movie, Muffy the Vampire Lair from 1992, which was made right after the original feature film, but before the show. I've seen a few clips. It's not a horror movie. It's just porn. Anyway, now all we got to do is the top 10. But let me do a few comments from YouTube, and we'll just we'll start jumping right in. Tom writes, I've only seen 3 vampire movies: Coppola's Dracula, Dracula's Hound, and Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism. I'm afraid I won't be able to help you on new discoveries. Well, you've already helped me because I've not seen Dracula's Hound and have not seen Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism. So you are 2 steps ahead of me. Ben Smith writes, love vampires and good V series. Old vampire movie that worries me. My time is limited. I mean, it all depends upon what you're into. I feel like there's so many different eras of vampire movies and so many different styles and so many different types of filmmakers have tackled it. It's really just like a buffet or an embarrassment of riches. So many good ones to choose from. So I'm going to give you some good ones. Bill Scurry writes, Reggie Barlow scares the fuck out of me. Yeah, Bill, thank you so much for giving me my my interface for this because I don't know how to use computers, as anybody who follows my channel can tell you. But he gave me this this whatever you call it, this overlay to make the live stream look cooler. Ben Smith writes, I've actually always said elves are kind of like vampires without the whole having a mass murder thing or eat what most seem to despise, the taste of animals. I guess it depends on what kind of elves you're talking about, because if you like Forgotten Realms, there's some drow elves out there that are pretty goddamn fucking savage. All right, so I think I'm going to pause it here for a little while, and I'm going to dive in with my top 10. My number 10, The Fearless Vampire Killers, or pardon me, but your teeth are in my neck. And of course, I put my clips in the wrong order, but here we go. Here we go.
And you got the wrong vampire.
As you can tell, this is a comedy, not a legit horror movie. But before Roman Polanski made Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown and all these giant movies in Hollywood, he made The Fearless Vampire Killers. And it's just outrageous. And it's probably a little on the slow side for some people. But if you want to see a parody or a satire of Hammer horror, it works great. If you want to see Sharon Tate in her absolute prime, you know, taking a bath, being fed upon, I mean, Sharon Tate is absolutely incredible. And it's just got so many sequences that are just some of the most astonishing sequences in the history of vampire movies, from the giant dance scene to the harpsichord music at the end. I mean, it's just awe-inspiring. And it just makes the tragedy of what happened to Sharon Tate a year later, 2 years later, that much more horrifying when you see her in that movie. I think that's Sharon Tate's finest hour. I mean, some are going to say Valley of the Dolls, but I just absolutely love her in that. And from the moment the movie starts, we've got the MGM logo, which transforms into animation with blood dripping through the credits, with this just bone-chilling music by Christoph Komeda. You know you're in the hands of a master storyteller. I mean, even the poster is incredible. The lower half is all drawn by Frank Frazetta. I forget who drew the top half. And in that, Polanski is from Poland. He gives the movie a lot of Central European flavor. I feel like a lot of our vampire movies, they basically borrow heavily from either Bram Stoker's Dracula or the play that was based on the book. More movies borrow from the play than from the book. But I feel like if you're going to do vampires, you need Central European flavor. And this movie goes all in on that. And it famously was a big flop in America. It opened up with a lengthy animated sequence, which was subsequently cut. So I've only seen the animated sequence like in isolation, never like a version of the movie with it, but also that American version cut 12 minutes worth of material. Although they might have had a point on that front, because the movie is a little slow. But I first saw that movie back in college. I've seen it many times since. And it fucking rocks. So number 9, The Hunger from 1983, which I think is one of the most stylish and erotic vampire films ever made. And what it lacks in narrative clarity or urgency, it more than makes up for in just pure raw cinematic excellence. And here is the clip. All right. And if you know the movie, you know why I had to stop it right there, because it turns into this outrageous sex scene. But Tony Scott loves that flower duet music from, I can't remember the name of the opera, but he used that music again in True Romance when Dennis Hopper is being interrogated. But that movie, it's funny how like that whole movie, I like it because of two lengthy sequences. At the beginning, we see David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve basically going hunting for sex and or food in this club where they're wearing shades at night. Only David Bowie gets to get away with wearing shades at night in a club. But you have Bauhaus playing Bela Lugosi's Dead, and it's just so incredible watching them pick out their prey, take them home for what seems like it's going to be a giant orgy, and it turns into this elaborate feeding sequence. And I just love The Hunger. And it just famously bombed here in America. In Tony Scott's own words, he writes, Hollywood just hated that movie. They called it esoteric, artsy fartsy. I mean, I'm not going to disagree that it's esoteric and artsy fartsy. I feel like there's a weird subgenre you could describe as like Euro sleaze, where it's not porn, it's not art house, but it's somewhere in that ambiguous gray area in between. I feel like The Hunger fits right in there. And I've seen it 4 or 5 times. And if someone just put a gun to my head and say, describe the last 30 minutes in your own words, but I have no idea how to describe it. But The Hunger is well worth hunting down, especially if you like Tony Scott. And if you don't like Tony Scott, how dare you? I mean, watch True Romance, watch Top Gun, watch Crimson Tide, watch Man on Fire, watch all of his great flicks. But I feel like The Hunger definitely deserves to be mentioned alongside Tony Scott's best stuff. But let's take a break from my list and look over at some questions. Ben Smith writes, matter of fact, both nuts, pinky fingers, and toes to be vampire elf without a second thought. I don't know if I know what that means, but if I had to choose between being a vampire or an elf, I mean, are we talking about a J.R.R. Tolkien elf like Elrond? Or are we talking about a cool fucking vampire? Because some vampires are just like big giant bat monsters and they have no charisma or personality. But if you're talking about Christopher Lee, where you could be sexy and elegant, bring on being a vampire all day, every day. Allie says, hi, everyone. Allie, what is happening? Fred Schaefer writes, the Vertilox segment from Mario Bava's Black Sabbath is a horror masterpiece. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I forgot to include it. I love Mario Bava. And what is Mario Bava's? Was it Black Sunday? Mario Bava, his first flick with Barbara Steele from 1960. This is just a sign of just how deep the bench is when it comes to the horror genre, that one of the coolest, most atmospheric, and one of the most stylish horror films ever made, and definitely one of the best vampire movies, didn't even make the list in any way, shape, or form, because there's just so many goddamn movies to get to. So thank you, Fred. Love Mario Bava, or as some folks in England call him Mario Bava. I mean, no, it's Mario Bava. But anyway, I love Mario Bava. And yeah, Black Sabbath is one of the best anthology horror films ever made. There are a lot of anthology horror films, very few ones that are good. Obviously, Creepshow kicks ass, and Black Sabbath kicks ass. So everybody hunt down those fine movies by Mario Bava. Let me get back to the comments. Ben Smith, yeah, basically want to be basically superhero strong and fast and live forever and solve climate change and nuclear proliferation. I think you just pitched the next big vampire movie. Vampires with a conscience who decide to save the world, all while feeding on people. Yeah, I wouldn't mind living forever. I mean, as Kiefer Sutherland pitches in Lost Boys, yeah, you'll never grow old, you'll never die, but you must feed. All right, let's get back to my list. So my number 8. A lot of y'all might not have heard of this, but it's from director Jose Ramon Larraz, and his movies have been catching on lately. Like, it's funny, in the internet age and in the Twitter age, so many obscure filmmakers have developed these like rabid cult followings. And who knows, maybe in the 70s he had one as well, but I was not born until 76, so I do not know. But of all of his movies, Vampires is one of my favorites from 1974. And when I mentioned before how to be a great erotic horror film, the horror and the sex have to be equally good, or it just feels out of balance. And I think this is the best example of that. It stars the lovely Marianne Morris and Anulka Dziubinska. Anyway, I cannot show really any clips from this movie, but I can show a snippet from the trailer just to whet your appetite. And basically, it's everybody's wet dream. Like men drive along this lonely road, and these two exotic women come out and say, "Oh, can you give us a ride home? We live like right around the corner." The men take them home, and they get loved up. They get served wine. They listen to music. Basically, it's like the date of all dates, where you're hanging out in a mansion with the two loveliest women imaginable, and they do all the naughty stuff, and then at the end of the night, they get torn to pieces and eaten alive. And it's so bloody and so gory. You're like, oh my God, like, calm down, Jose Ramon. You're kind of overdoing it. But I just absolutely love that movie. And I didn't see it until I was like 41 or 42, and I was just spellbound. And in my top 10 erotic horror film list I did years ago, it's my number one. And the most popular thing that I've ever put on the internet was a written post back in 2015 of just top 10 erotic horror films. That post has over 1 million clicks, and I haven't checked it like in a year or two. So I'm not alone in liking this. Some people don't like discussing that stuff, but clearly somebody is seeing eyeball to eyeball with me. Let me scroll down a bit. Tom writes, can Crash 1996 be interpreted as a vampire movie? I wouldn't. I love Crash. I think it fucking rules. It's one of David Cronenberg's best. But I find it much more interesting in terms of what happens with the kind of the intersection of technology and human beings, and what kind of strange, perverse lifestyles people can discover after suffering like really violent trauma to their bodies. And so I love Crash, but I just wouldn't quite put it in the vampire kind of subgenre. But Classify One writes, Coppola's Dracula #1 defo. I fucking love it. I'll be getting to that in a sec. Even if it's not 100% like the book, the acting, Gary Oldman kills it. Same for Hopkins. The cinematography, music, directing to die for, masterpiece. Yeah, I mean, Dracula by Bram Stoker has never really truly been adapted, but that one comes the closest in terms of at least attempting to capture the format of the novel, where you got the diary entries and the letters and the phonograph recordings of all the characters, whether you're talking about Jonathan Harker or Dr. Seward or Lucy Westenra. And that's the joy of the book, is how everything's kind of after the fact, where you're kind of playing catch up on everybody's correspondence. And in the words of Clive Barker, he said it's a first-rate trashy novel. And I've read it 3 times or 2 times, at a minimum 2, maybe 3. But I first read it in high school. But Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie, comes pretty close. What it, I guess, embellishes or adds to is everything involving the love story between Mina and Vlad. And obviously, I love all the stuff in the beginning, watching Gary Oldman just butchering his enemies and impaling them, and all that Vlad the Impaler stuff is absolutely incredible. And then later on, like when they're hanging out and watching erotic silent movies, because silent movies came out in around 1895, and that book came out in 1897. But I love how in the movie they actually go to a silent cinema to see like the wonders of the Western world, in Gary Oldman's words. And that stuff's really cool. And I think Coppola realized, wow, like the novel and cinema came into being at the same time. Let's find some overlap between the two. And so there's just so much interesting stuff going on. It's probably the vampire movie that I've seen more than any other. So we'll be getting to Coppola in greater detail here in a sec. But let's get back to my list. With my number 7, The Lost Boys from 1987. Joel Schumacher. This movie is 97 minutes. I had a poster of it on my wall in middle school. Saw it over and over and over again on HBO, and it's got the Coreys, it's got that giant muscle dude playing saxophone, it's got comic shops. I think it was Sam Kinison, the comedian, said it was the coolest movie ever made. Not the best, but just the coolest movie ever made. He might have been overstating the case, and he was probably on blow at the time, but it fucking rocks. And that, like, the theme song, just the theme song, Cry Little Sister, is perfect. And I've got a clip here of Kiefer Sutherland and Jason Patric throwing down. so fucking cool. Kiefer Sutherland, I first saw him in Stand By Me, and I thought he was terrifying as Ace. And then when he appeared in Lost Boys, that just solidified his status as one of the baddest motherfuckers and one of the coolest young actors of his generation at that time. And Lost Boys, yeah, I rewatched it for the first time in decades the other night. And while it didn't hit me the same way it did when I was 11, where I was just, transfixed, I still loved every second of it. I mean, like Jamie Gertz as the love interest, she's just so goddamn beautiful. Diane Wiest, I never know how to say her name. She's marvelous as the mother. Got Alex Winter in there right around the time I think he would do Bill and Ted's 2 years later. But it's a fucking 80s classic. And I feel like that movie couldn't be made or wouldn't be made in any other era. And in the 80s, at least because I was young at the time, that was when vampire movies started to have kind of characters within who know their vampire history from movies and comics and shows, as opposed to from science. Like when you watch vampire movies in the 20s and 30s and 40s, when Van Helsing shows up, it's like, oh, here is the noted scientist from across the English Channel who knows about like obscure blood diseases and that sort of thing. And he's always like the expert that's brought in to kind of educate everybody. But by the time you get to Lost Boys or Fright Night or whatever, you just need to know a nerd who doesn't fit in, who loves all this shit, and they can tell you all the rules. And so maybe I wouldn't look at it the same way if I saw it for the first time now, but it's one of the formative influences on me. But the movie that I really want to call attention to from the exact same year, from my number 6, would be Kathryn Bigelow's Near Dark, her solo directorial debut. She had co-directed a movie, I think it's called Loveless in 1981 or 2. But she just came blasting out of the gate. And she basically saw James Cameron's Aliens and said, oh, what a great cast. Thank you. I'll take them and put them in my movie. Made Jeanette Goldstein and Lance Henriksen and Bill Paxton. And I love how it's, even if you didn't have vampire movies, it would still be like a cool, like kind of outlaw, modern day, like neo-Western kind of noir flick with like, murderers and carnivores on the run. And I don't know if there's an earlier example of like where that Western flavor and vampires had come together so effectively. But yeah, those actors, obviously, they're part of James Cameron's kind of inner circle. And then obviously Kathryn Bigelow would become part of James Cameron's inner circle as well. They would collaborate on Strange Days. They got married for a couple of years. But I've got a clip right here, including or featuring the great Bill Paxton. And all I can say is RIP, gone too soon.
Well, I'll be goddamn. Shit kicker heaven.
And for some reason, that clip came in totally jet black. It's not supposed to be that dark. I should have double checked the clip before playing it. Anyway, that whole sequence, I think that's probably the best or the most entertaining sequence of Kathryn Bigelow's career. If you go on like movie clips on YouTube and look up Near Dark, they've broken that scene into 3 back-to-back clips where you just have these vampires going into a bar and just taking over the place and just murdering and butchering and torturing and intimidating everybody there. And it's just balls to the wall, kick-ass, confident filmmaking where the actors are just leaning into it, clearly like relishing every line. Like Lance Henriksen, I don't know if feels ever better. Bill Paxton, I don't know if feels ever better. It's just a masterclass. And the whole movie is cool, but I think the reason people remember Near Dark is because of that scene. And that is the scene that I saw when I was like 11 or 12, when I saw it late night on HBO. Wow. I've never seen anything quite like this. Also, if you look real closely, you'll see James Cameron in the background under a marquee of in the background, there's a marquee with aliens. And then James Cameron plays a guy who flips off Bill Paxton in the movie. So that whole team of collaborators is just cool as shit. And also, you got to check out the poster by Enzo Schiotti, because Enzo Schiotti is one of the all-time great movie poster artists. And I don't know how many he did, but marvelous artist. But the poster he did of Bill Paxton with like the ribs and the shades and everything is just absolutely fucking glorious. So let's go over to the YouTube chat and see what comments are coming in. I feel like I need to play a little catch up. All right. Fred Schaefer writes, I'm a big fan of Vamp from 1986 with Grace Jones. I saw Vamp. It says 80s is a line of cocaine on a glass top table. You should say as 80s is a line of cocaine off a stripper's butt, but it never takes itself seriously. I don't think I've seen it in nearly 30 years, and I need to hunt it down without a doubt. Charity Schmidt writes, I still haven't seen The Hunger. Definitely check it out. I mean, Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie, you cannot beat that. Eric Patterson writes, hey, James. Eric, right back at you. How the hell are you? Hang on. Got For some reason, the chat, when you scroll, will go slowly and then suddenly it skips ahead. It's like I need it just to stay right where I want it to be. It's spelled Seek Photog. I believe this is Sean. I'm blanking on his. I know his name in full, but anyway, he writes the opening of The Hunger is crazy hot and horrific, terrific movie. Yeah, that first 10 or 15 minutes, you just can't beat it. You cannot top that. The Boys in the Lab. Cassidy from Preacher is an honorable mention. I know it's comics, but a cool interpretation. Let's set aside the abomination of the show that was made in the same name. Talk about Garth Ennis's comic. Garth Ennis's Preacher from the 90s is a strong contender for the best ongoing comic book series ever from any era. Got Garth Ennis writing the stories and Steve Dillon on pencils. And one of the characters is an Irishman who happens to be a vampire. And some of the best stories are about his origin, how he became a vampire during I guess it was the late teens or early 20s. I can't remember if it was officially Irish Civil War or earlier, but basically 100 years ago. And it's just a fascinating character. So if you want to see just a drunken Irishman just wreaking havoc and just murdering people left and right, well, all with a sense of humor and style, Cassidy is so goddamn good. Just an absolutely brilliant character. And I think Garth Ennis' finest hour as a storyteller. Eliatic Stranger writes, hey, James, right back at you. And I see that you are a member. So that's a good time for me to throw out some memberships for whoever wants them. I'm going to gift 20 memberships. And if you're active in the chat or active with the channel, YouTube just distributes them to whoever they deem to be most deserving. And for months now, I've been talking about doing members only streams, but I feel guilty about doing it for whatever reason. And I need to figure out how to do the settings where I can do a members only stream where anybody can watch, but only members can write. And so that'll incentivize people to join. But there goes the gift. And all right, I think I'm back to where I was. Beautiful. All right, I'm going to pause there. Interview with the Vampire was also very good. Classified 1. Yeah, I saw Interview with the Vampire in the theater, and I was pretty much transfixed. Neil Jordan's a hell of a filmmaker. Then I listened to the book on tape. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, Brad Pitt's fantastic. Introduced the world to Kirsten Dunst. And Tom Cruise is a pretty goddamn good Lestat. I mean, who's the Lestat from Queen of the Damned? Stuart Townsend. He played Lestat. Stuart Townsend, I think, had the look and the right age. I mean, Lestat, to be a great vampire, like hot rock star, you need to look like you're 19 or 20, but at the same time, feel like you're hundreds of years old. Maybe he didn't have the acting chops quite to pull it off, but he definitely had the look down. And is it Aaliyah or Elia? But the pop star who played the Queen of the Damned, she died when she was like 21. So that was the third book in Anne Rice's series, I believe. But the book, The Vampire Lestat, is book 2. But I need to do more homework when it comes to Anne Rice because, like I said, I've only really done the deep dive on the first book. But let's get back to my list. Number 5, we're going to go with Fright Night from 1985 because this was the vampire movie where I fell in love with vampire movies. A friend of mine gave me a bootleg. I played it until it fell to pieces. And I feel like there's certain movies that come along about the high school experience when you're looking forward to the high school experience that have a huge impact on you. And basically, like when you're 9 or 10 years old and you're looking forward to like kissing girls and all that kind of stuff, when you see awkward teens wrestling with trying to lose their virginity and things like that, all while this very charismatic, slick, handsome vampire moves in next door and he's murdering people left and right, including seducing your girlfriend. There's just a lot to relate to in terms of all the teenage melodrama there. And of course, Roddy McDowall is sublime. This was my introduction to Roddy McDowall as Peter Vincent. You have an over-the-hill actor who's sentimental about his glory days, and now he finally gets a chance to be what he's always pretended to be, or as the villain says in the movie, welcome to Fright Night, for real. And I haven't even mentioned Evil Ed yet, but let's give us a clip, and that'll give us all the introduction that we need. Evil Ed, one of the most iconic characters from the 1980s. So awkward, so strange, so weird, and so charismatic. He is fucking hilarious and just constantly making fun of his friend for like getting like burger smushed in his face, and just everything he does is so unpredictable and kind of edgy and strange, but he just gives the movie this bizarre energy that takes it into strange territory. But I love how, I mean, there's so much about this movie that fucking rules, like the wailing 80s kind of like, I don't know, like sex guitar. I mean, one of the early scenes, the kid's looking through his window at his neighbor and he sees at least initially just a topless girl, and you're hearing all this music. Then he realizes, oh, there's a vampire about to bite her, but the guitar just keeps wailing. And then later on, when they go to this dance club where Amy gets basically taken away and they're having this elaborate dance scene, and as soon as the vampire like reaches down like into her skirt, she pulls away, but there's a cut. And suddenly the actress playing Amy, her hair's like really big and frizzed. Like they decided to like tease her hair out and show how she's starting to get like aroused and turned on. And I feel like anytime you can find that weird, awkward energy where teenagers are nervous and anxious about doing the dirty deed, but also, I guess, being seduced by somebody who's like older and more mature and more knowing, it just takes you into really interesting terrain, especially if you're a young prepubescent male. And I was just absolutely fucking floored by it. And I watched it again the other night and it still totally holds up. So Fright Night, 1985, fuck the remake. I don't know why people keep remaking classic horror movies, but that is where I stand on that. But let's get back to the chat. Andre Villafranca writes, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I always kind of overemphasize the pronunciation, but he writes, James, I strongly recommend you Shinichi Sakamoto's DRCL Midnight Children, a manga interpretation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Sounds right up my fucking alley. I would definitely check it out. Also writes, it's so sad we don't have a proper Anne Rice The Vampire Chronicles TV series. The recent one's atrocious. Yeah, I avoided it. I feel like, yeah, Anne Rice, the good news is she sold millions and millions of books. So her story's out there. It is well loved. It is like, you know, there are Anne Rice fanatics out there. There's legions of fans who know that world really well. So I feel like that's the ultimate kind of testament to her power as a storyteller. And you probably needed, if Neil Jordan would have just stuck with the series, or at least through the first couple books, that probably would have been the way to go. But yeah, some great fantasy series and horror series and sci-fi series are just never destined to be, or never destined to have a series or movies that do them justice, and that makes the books all the more special. Charity Smith writes, still holds up, very funny and great soundtrack. I believe she's talking about Lost Boys, and yeah, I totally agree. Eric Patterson, saxophone guy used to tour with Tina Turner. No fucking way. I mean, I feel like if someone were to say what is the most iconic like 3-second shot of the 1980s, it would be that guy swinging his hips to the side, wailing on that tenor saxophone. And as a kid, I played alto sax, and I was always very jealous. Like, God, the tenor sax looks way cooler than the alto sax. Alto sax has the straight neck. Tenor has the curved neck, and it's much bigger. But yeah, every muscle-bound guy out there with long hair should have a tenor saxophone in their trunk of their car just to pose for pictures. Allie writes, trouble every day, vampires or cannibals? You can easily make a case for it as just a kick-ass cannibal movie. It blurs the lines. I think because it goes so into the realm of realism, it stops feeling like the world of the supernatural. And for me, vampires always feel otherworldly, supernatural, like an apparition or a spirit that's kind of like halfway between the physical world and the supernatural world. But if you want to say Trouble Every Day is like the best goddamn cannibal movie ever made, I'll allow it. I won't push back. All right, but let's move on to my number 4. We've talked about it quite a bit at this point, but we're going to go with Bram Stoker's Dracula. At least everybody calls it Bram Stoker's Dracula. If you look it up, it's just Dracula from 1992, but the poster says Bram Stoker's Dracula. But this is a movie that I saw in the theater where, for a vampire movie, it's the closest I've come to seeing one that feels like a Hollywood event. And obviously the Twilight movies made a lot of money. Fuck those movies. Bram Stoker's Dracula was an R-rated erotic horror movie that was made for like $40 million and then grossed like $200. I mean, it was a fucking blockbuster. And there's not a single computer-generated effect in sight. Every old school filmmaking trick in the book, from Irish shot to what, like, it's almost like Coppola and his crew went back to like the late 1800s and early 1900s. Like, what are the classic fundamental kind of tricks of the trade that we can use to make this movie feel a little bit like it might have taken place in that period. And it can be as great or it can be as horrible as it is great at times. Like Keanu Reeves, worst English accent in the history of cinema, perhaps. He's absolutely atrocious. There are times where Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing almost feels like a cartoon character. But there are other ingredients like Sadie Frost as Lucy. Maybe the sexiest vampire who ever walked or crawled. And she understands that when a vampire is feeding on you, you need to writhe in sexual ecstasy. It should be a mix of like pain and bliss all rolled into one. And I've got a clip of her in vampire mode right here.
Come to me. My arms hungry for you, my darling. Kiss me and caress me. My darling husband, please.
I mean, sweet baby Jesus. It's one of the most beautiful shots in the history of the vampire genre. But those scenes early on where like she's running through the gardens of her mansion in the rain with Winona Ryder, and there's like the brief second when they pause and kiss, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? But like Bram Stoker's novel, all that sexual tension, because it's a Victorian novel, it's very much like underneath the surface. It's well disguised. It's like it's deep, deep, deep underneath. And if you're looking for it, you can see it. But this is a novel that came out in 1897. But by 1992, Coppola's like, you know what? We're just going to take all that subtext and we're just going to blow it wide open. We're going to hire Monica Bellucci to take her top off and bleed friggin' Keanu Reeves dry. And I think of all the sequences in mainstream Hollywood history where you see vampires seducing a mere mortal, that's got to be one of the best. Keanu Reeves, just poor dumbass, wandering through the castle, hears all these women whispering, lays down, and suddenly just naked women just start coming out of the ground and biting his nipples and biting they're biting him all over. Like, all right, well, just don't strike me blind before I die, because I want to enjoy the experience. I love it. And the music is pure dynamite. And I think it's probably Coppola's last really satisfying movie. Like The Rainmaker, you could make a case for that. But for the guy who made The Godfather 1 and 2 and The Conversation, Apocalypse Now, like one of the best Hollywood filmmakers ever. And obviously he's got movies like The Outsiders and things like that. But I think this is the last time where Coppola really showed us what it means to make a movie with style and bravado and confidence. And it just absolutely fucking rules. I have no idea how many times I've seen it, but I will probably continue to watch it for the rest of my life. But before I give my top 3, I'm just going to have a quick glance at the comments and see how far behind I am. Bill Paxton is amazing in Near Dark. Yeah, hell yeah. Bill Paxton kills me that he died as young as he did. He could have easily made movies for 20, 30 more years. I think the last thing I saw him in was Nightcrawler. But he was fantastic. Andre Villafranca writes, my first crush was a vampire lady called Elizabeth Bartley, Dracula's niece in Castlevania Bloodlines, 1994. Maybe my love for pale women came from her. I've never played Castlevania Bloodlines. For my Castlevania knowledge, I go Castlevania 1 and 2 and 3 on the Nintendo, then Super Castlevania on the Super Nintendo, then I have a big gap, and then I have a Symphony of the Night. Is that what it's called? The one that was for the PlayStation where you're playing Dracula's son, fucking awesome. When it comes to that Metroidvania, or not, I don't have to say Metroidvania, but that Castlevania style, it perfectly blends the RPG with the action games, and I just fucking loved it. But yeah, I need to check out Castlevania Bloodlines. I'm assuming it's not a short film. I'm assuming it's a game. But speaking of Castlevania, the Netflix series knocked it out of the park. I think the Netflix series is one of the best adaptations of video games ever. Mucho Man writes, Lost Boys original soundtrack is one of the best ever. I agree. I'm once again age 11. I absolutely was enthralled. And there's Tim Capella's the saxophonist. I love how Tim Capella has got legions of fans out there. All I know him from is that. But oh no, he played with Tina Turner. He did this. He did that. I love how I'm not alone in my admiration for that character. But we've been going 49 minutes. Yeah, I guess we just need to go ahead and dive into my top 3 because we're going to start running out of time. So my number 3 is going to be all the various iterations of Nosferatu. I've got obviously Werner Herzog's version here, Phantom der Nacht, which became Nosferatu the Vampire in America. But F.W. Murnau, Nosferatu, 1922. It was famously an illegal use of the material, so it got nearly sued to oblivion. Thankfully, the Bram Stoker estate did not succeed in destroying the movie. And it was the beginning of one of the most legendary film careers imaginable before F.W. Murnau's life was cut short in a horrible car wreck, I think in 1931. But he gave us Nosferatu. He gave us The Last Laugh. He gave us Faust. And he gave us Sunrise. I mean, this is one of the best filmmakers who ever lived. And I have a clip from his film. Right, at least I should. Where the fuck is it? Boo, boo. There it is. And as you can see, 101 years ago, long before the last voyage of the Demeter, people are already doing really good stuff with the voyage of the Demeter, where famously you've got the boxes of earth in the coffin with all the kind of experimental soil that he likes to rest in being transported, and he's slowly but surely picking people off. And if you see the right version of Nosferatu as he comes out on the deck of the ship, it's supposed to be blue tinted, but the earliest version I saw it didn't have the blue tinting. I was like, well, it's bright daylight. Shouldn't he be getting killed? Because he gets killed by sunlight at the end. So you need to see the right versions of Nosferatu, which is thankfully been lovingly restored many times over. But it blows my mind that a movie that's over a century old can still play as well as it does, that you can post clips online and people will still retweet it, like, or re-exit, or whatever the hell you call it these days on Twitter when you repost something. But yeah, this is the only silent film that is on the list. But silent horror, there's so many good ones. It's I wouldn't say an inexhaustible resource, but there are a lot of good ones out there. If you like your old school movies, definitely check it out. And of course, we have to give a shout out to Shadow of the Vampire, which came out like 80 years later, where you have Willem Dafoe playing the man who may or may not have been an actual vampire in Nosferatu. But just that look, that bald-headed look with the pointed ears. I mean, Klaus Kinski looks pretty good in that as well. I prefer my vampires to be more glamorous and handsome. But if you want your vampires to look more like a bat, well, then you cannot beat Nosferatu. And when it comes to the Werner Herzog remake, there's some early stuff where Jonathan Harker, the character is basically, I always forget which ones are taking liberties with the characters' names, but the Jonathan Harker figure, as he's riding toward the castle, they had that classic 70s music that only Herzog really knew how to put his fingers on, mix of opera and like folk and that sort of thing. But it's some of the most atmospheric, beautiful filmmaking that I've ever seen, and strongly recommend people hunt it down. When it comes to remakes of movies that actually don't suck, because there's so many horrible remakes out there, Werner Herzog's remake definitely deserves to be in that top 10. And I did a video about that back in December. But moving on to my number 2, we got Dracula from 1931, which famously had a Spanish version shot at night on the same sets, but with a different cast and different director. That is also really good. And even though Bela Lugosi is so famous for playing the character, he only played the character Dracula in movies twice. He obviously played him on the stage in 1927, and he played 2 other vampires in other movies. Like, but it's hang on. Where, yeah, so it's called Hollywood on Parade, where he stalks Betty Boop, bending over her throat and growling, "Boop, you have booped your last boop." He also did Mark of the Vampire, which is a remake of London After Midnight, Todd Browning's lost horror film. And he's got Prague. Sorry. Oh, sorry. That's another one about Mark of the Vampire. But he also played a vampire in Columbia's The Return of the Vampire in 1944. But it was actually Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, where I first saw Bela Lugosi as Dracula on TV way back in the day. So even though the movie is much more famous, or the 1931 movie is much more famous, I'm going to show y'all a clip from Abbott and Costello because I just fucking love it. So that is the Wolfman taking out Dracula at the end. And Todd Browning's best movie for me is probably Freaks, but he also did some really cool silent movies like West of Zanzibar and like The Unholy Three. I mean, Todd Browning sadly is kind of forgotten now because his movies came out 90 years ago, 100 years ago, etc. But he's one of the giants. But Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, it's got to be up there with some of the great horror comedies ever made, up there with American Werewolf in London, or whatever the case might be. And Bela Lugosi had financial problems and health problems and drug problems and all those things. but he still brought the heat in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein when Abbott first opens up the coffin and sees him. I mean, it's fucking hilarious. If you like a little comedy in your horror, definitely check it out. But Bela Lugosi, one of the best, if not the best, to do it, if not for the fact that you've got Christopher Lee from The Horror of Dracula, 1958 in America, just Dracula in the UK. But Christopher Lee played Dracula 7 times for Hammer and 3 more times outside of their franchise. And I feel like when it comes to like the Jake LaMotta and Sugar Ray Robinson of horror, or Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, they were put on this earth to do battle in all the various Hammer films where you had got a little class, a little trash, a little blood, a little cleavage, and 2 world-class actors. And even though Christopher Lee famously hated playing the part, so much so he refused to have any lines in Dracula Prince of Darkness, he was just put on this earth to play this character. And like some of the movie posters, like Dracula's Risen from the Grave is one of the greatest movie posters ever, with the Band-Aid on the girl's neck. And if we had, going back to that debate, do you want to be an elf or a vampire? If I had to be a vampire from any movie, it would be Christopher Lee from Horror of Dracula, but not at the very end where he gets taken out, as I'll show you in the following clip. And that scene famously had a couple seconds removed that only got restored in, I think, like in the 21st century. For a long time, it was hard to see the entire death sequence involving Christopher Lee. But yeah, of all the Hammer horror films that I've seen, I mean, I like Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, and things like that. I love all the Karnstein trilogy. I like a lot of them. The Horror of Dracula remains my favorite Hammer horror film. I feel like that is the blueprint for the style, the approach, just the template for the success of that whole studio from the late 50s up to the early 70s. And it was just a great time to be a horror fan. But obviously Christopher Lee played the character many times. I love him in Dracula AD 1972, where he gets to meet the sexiest Hammer horror starlet, Caroline Munro. Jesus Christ, just the still of her kind of turning her head with all the blood going down and Christopher Lee leering at her. Wow, I mean, that is what the horror genre is all about. But that is the end of my list. I've got a list of movies that I'm still planning on seeing, like Mr. Vampire, Night Flyer, Blood for Dracula, Nadja, Reflecting Skin, Wisdom of Crocodiles, Mary, Mary, Bloody Mary, Countess Vampire, and Requiem for Vampire. But with all my notes out of the way, I'm just going to devote the rest of the stream just to going through y'all's questions. And when we hit the end, we will call it a day. So Classified One writes, James, this is completely off topic, but next time you should do a live top 10 best remake. Not all remakes are worthless, i.e. Scarface is technically a remake of the 1932 film by Howard Hawks. I am, you and I see eyeball to eyeball. I love the Brian De Palma Scarface, and I love the Howard Hawks one. I did a video on that topic in December. So if you look at my playlist and you look at my top 10 list, you'll see, I think it's called Top 10 Remakes That Don't Suck or something like that. You know what? I'm just going to find the name. James Hancock, Top 10 Remakes. Let's see what Google says. Top 10 Best Movie Remakes for People Who Hate Remakes. November 15th, 2022. Actually, I might be able to just copy and paste the link into the chat. Let's see if I can do this. Once again, I'm an idiot when it comes to technology. Bam, there it is. I just posted the link. Definitely hunt it down. Everything is awesome. Oh my God, every time I write anything or do anything, the whole chat goes down to the bottom when I'm trying to stay and go line by line. That is a design flaw. Everything is awesome, writes, yes, Ben Smith, Lost Boys still holds up. Great summer movie for me. Usually watch it once a year. The oiled up saxophone playing bodybuilder alone is worth it. People fucking love this guy. Yeah, so I think he is the MVP of this live stream. Tom writes, do you view the 80s as trash compared to other decades? I don't regard them as trash. Maybe they're a little trashy, but those are my formative years. I mean, Near Dark, Lost Boys, and Fright Night. Those are that is like the 80s vampire flick for me. And I think a little trash goes a long way. And also, as long as we're criticizing movies for being trashy, I mean, as I mentioned before, Clive Barker referred to Bram Stoker's novel as a first-rate trashy novel. And the Hammer horror films, people think of them as being so elegant and sophisticated. They're not that sophisticated. They have English accents and castles, but they're still a little trashy. So I think people shouldn't hand out speeding tickets for being trashy when it comes to the horror genre. Scrolling down a bit. Oh, cool. All my memberships, so I've managed to reach the right people. Very cool. Daniel Rosenberg writes, I love From Dusk Till Dawn. I really do as well, but I like it quite intensely up through the Salma Hayek dance. And then when everybody starts to change, it just, the tone is off from it. It's never quite worked. And I feel like the rules that they established early on about how to kill vampires kind of seem to be disregarded by the end, where someone will have a handgun and shoot a vampire and they'll just explode. I'm like, well, wait a second. Why are they exploding? All you did was shoot them. But all the crime ingredients feel like a mid 90s Tarantino, Rodriguez, like Desperado and Reservoir Dogs kind of colliding. And of course, Salma Hayek's Striptease is a Hall of Fame sequence from any era for any genre. Dinner Bell tries, James, wow, thank you, sir. Yeah, I mean, it's the least I can do. Y'all are giving me your time and attention on this channel, so the least I can do is hand out some memberships. Everything is awesome, writes, also love Fright Night, great score, great vampire, great practical effects. I'm right there with you. Fright Night has aged like wine. Absolutely love it. Astro 1980 writes, Fright Night is one of the greatest 80s movies ever. Yep. I mean, I think, yeah, I was gonna try to qualify that. Fuck it. It's just one of the greatest. Fred writes, Evil Ed is one of the all-time great horror film characters. I agree. He's just incredible. And I know he did some other movies, but he was never able to recapture that that lightning in the bottle, but at least he had his moment. SEAK Photog. Once again, I think it's Sean something or other. I apologize that I'm screwing up your name. I know I should know your full name. If you want to do an Anne Rice deep dive, check out her Sleeping Beauty series written under the pseudonym A.N. Roquelaure or Roquelaure. I lack the education to pronounce that properly. Yeah, I need to get back into reading Anne Rice. I was one and done, and I've been neglecting her for decades. Daniel Rosenberg writes, I just realized I haven't seen that many vampire movies. And there's shitload. Once again, whether you like classic cinema, modern cinema, you've got plenty to choose from. Everything is awesome, writes, the original Let the Right One In was a great new take on the vampire legend. Really good watch. And I think it's so superior in so many ways to the Matt Reeves remake. I mean, I was just watching the Matt Reeves one the other day. The pool sequence was so much more graphic and so much more hardcore at the end of the original. I mean, or maybe my mind's just playing tricks on me, but you got like body parts being thrown into the pool. And I feel like it was much more horrific. I like Chloe Grace Moretz quite a bit in the character, but I just think that original film, which is much more disturbing. And also I saw the first one first, the way one ought to. TJK writes, same here. Daniel, heard of a few of these, but yeah, I mean, I'm just hoping I'm throwing out enough titles and enough clips where if a few of you end up seeing some of these movies, mission accomplished for the live stream. Glibglob87 writes, I've got to say my favorite of all time is Gary Oldman. I mean, Gary Oldman just hurls himself into it. The way he is almost like chewing on the pronunciation of all of his words. It's just delightful. And Gary Oldman's been doing brilliant stuff his entire career. I mean, watch The Firm from the late 80s, about like all these soccer hooligans. That was incredible. Or Sid and Nancy. I got to meet him one time. I was working as an assistant to a producer on the film Hannibal back in 2000. And we were shooting in Asheville, North Carolina. And everybody's having problems with their trailers and their satellites and TV. And after I had fixed Dino De Laurentiis' TV so he could watch the World Cup, the word got out that I knew how to fix these TVs. And so I got to go to Gary Oldman's trailer to fix his TV. And he was fully dressed up in Mason Verger makeup. And we exchanged like all of 2 words. I was like, hi, how are you? And he was like, kind of nodded. And I got to work on his TV. But I remember him describing Asheville, not in the most flattering way. He described it as a city where he said it felt like a giant bomb had gone off that doesn't affect the infrastructure, but only kills the people because it was just so quiet and so subdued. Because it's just a sleepy little mountain town in North Carolina. Anyway, so that was my one exposure to Gary Oldman in the flesh. Robert O'Mara writes, good evening, Seamus. Hello, everyone. Yeah, Seamus is my name over in the Emerald Isle, and Robert O'Mara is now setting up a film studio in France. So if you want to shoot a low-budget movie in France, hunt him down at Bob Unsound on Twitter. But he directed Once Upon a Time in Ireland Part 1 and 2, which are on this channel. Also watch those as well. Andre Villafranca writes, don't worry about pronunciation, James. You're good. Excellent. Whelmed writes, just joining. Just hope Dracula Untold is on this list. You know what? That is a recommendation I'm going to add to my to the movies I need to see. Dracula Untold 2014, directed by Gary Shore. I must admit, never even heard of this. Actually, you know what? It's the Luke Evans one. I did hear about this. It came out right as I was starting my podcast, Wrong Reel. I don't know why I didn't see it. I like Luke Evans quite a bit. I think he's a really dynamic actor. Thank you for the recommendation. I will definitely hunt it down. And shout out to Dracula Untold. Let's see. Classified 1, not the last time. Coppola's Youth Without Youth is also quite stylish. Not as much as Dracula, though. Everything is awesome. How could I forget Innocent Blood? I had that awesome poster on my wall in high school. Yeah, John Landis, everybody remembers him for his late 70s, early 80s movies. I mean, Animal House and friggin' Blues Brothers and American Werewolf in London and Trading Places and Three Amigos and Spies Like Us. I mean, John Landis was on a serious hot streak. But Innocent Blood, well worth watching. If you want to see Robert Loggia as a vampire, definitely check it out. TJK writes, looking forward to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu take. Fuck yeah. Robert Eggers, very talented director. I think I liked his first two more than his, what the hell is this Viking movie called? I'm blanking. Was it just called The Viking? Shit. Hang on. Robert Eggers. Internet is a wonderful, beautiful thing. But yeah, The Lighthouse and The Witch were killer. The Northman, not The Viking, The Northman. I like The Northman, had a lot of style, but I felt like maybe it couldn't get out of its own way. I was hoping for something more like Conan the Barbarian, and he gave us something quite different. But I get that people love it. But if any director alive has the chops and the talent and the vision and the track record to give us a great Nosferatu movie, it would be Robert Eggers. So yeah, bring on more versions of Nosferatu as long as they're good and people are making them with integrity and vision, etc. I'll keep showing up and keep watching them until the end of time. Scrolling down un poco más. A.I. Pacino writes, did I miss Let the Right One In? That's one of my strong honorable mentions, but it is not in my top 10. I love it, but maybe I was just too old by the time that I saw it. And I feel like the movies that you see when you're young and impressionable, every single movie in my top 10, I saw like in the 80s and 90s, the only exception being Vampires from 1974. And that's on here for very libidinous reasons as opposed to cinematic ones. Although I think it's still worth watching for cinematic reasons. Charity Schmidt writes, few other vampire movies people might not remember. 30 Days of Night, I did see that based on the comic, well worth hunting down. And First Bitten, I believe she means Once Bitten, which I saw a billion times. Jim Carrey, old school. It's got Lauren Hutton. And when it comes to 80s movies, I mean, I was talking about this with Fright Night about how there's that strange overlap between boys trying to lose their virginity and people kind of preying upon that. That movie is like the heavyweight champion of that category, where it has a dance sequence, maybe the best dance sequence of the 1980s. And there are a lot of strong contenders. We have two women, the human and the vamp, fighting over Jim Carrey. And it's just glorious. I think Shout Factory put it on Blu-ray recently. If you never saw Once Bitten, at a minimum, see the dance sequence. But I saw it quite a few times on VHS as a kid, and I just absolutely loved it to pieces. Fred Schaefer writes, Christopher Lee hosted SNL in the late 70s and refused to play Dracula in a skit. I believe it. I mean, his favorite role he ever played was in The Wicker Man. Lord Summerisle, I think's his name, and it's a much better written part, so I get it. But goddamn, how can you not like him as Dracula? Picasso Damiello writes, Fearless Vampire Killers and What We Do in the Shadows are the greatest. Yeah, I love comedy horror. It's tough to beat, and I feel like if you like comedy mixed with horror, those two are extraordinary, and they're tough to beat. And of course, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, where you got the great Bela Lugosi doing his thing. Trey Roke writes, as a kid, I always got confused as to who was the vampire, Cushing or Lee. That's an interesting bit of trivia, which I don't know the answer to. Did Peter Cushing ever play a vampire? We might as well have been a vampire in Star Wars, but let's see. I'm going to bet that he never did, but we'll find out in a couple seconds. Whether playing the hero or villain, Cushing, the oldest heir of authority, could care. Oh, it says the closest he came was playing Sherlock Holmes, who's an actual vampire, sort of. But Moff Tarkin, obviously. Dr. Frankenstein. I mean, as Dr. Frankenstein in The Curse of Frankenstein, he's a murderous fucking asshole. But I don't think he ever actually played a vampire. Yeah, I think he just got to play Van Helsing. So there we go. But I love Peter Cushing, obviously. I think I'm getting close to the bottom. Fuck, I lost my place again. Blade deserves a shout out. The Boys in the Lab. Once again, I cannot believe I left out Blade. Blade fucking rules. I feel like long before Spider-Man and the X-Men, all these movies kind of helped get the superhero movies get up and running. Blade was the Blade and Blade 2. First rate. I mean, Wesley Snipes, such a fucking badass. I mean, he would do so much of his own choreography. I love the sequence with like the blood coming out of the ceiling as he's just fucking everybody up. It's absolutely fabulous. And what was I going to say? Anyway, I'm trying to find my place in line or in the feed and think at the same time, and I'm getting myself confused. Tom writes, in Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, Christopher Lee plays Count Ocula. The movie isn't great. All right, well, that's not a strong recommendation. Picasso D'Amelio writes, can't wait for the new Dracula movie. I mean, yeah, I have a feeling that. Well, are you talking about Last Voyage of the Demeter? Yeah, I'll be seeing it. I think Tuesday. It's either Tuesday or Thursday next week. I have movie tickets for 2 flicks next week, and I can't remember which falls on which day. Andre also writes, to finish, just want to thank you for your awesome cultured channel. You're a pure nerd and I love your passion. Keep up the consistent great work, and please don't forget to review Blasphemous 2. I've got Blasphemous 2 pre-ordered on my Xbox X, but the problem is right now I am playing Baldur's Gate 3. It came out yesterday. I was going to originally review Meg 2, The Trench, but my download of Baldur's Gate 3 finished, and I was like, oh God, it was like a vampire seeing blood, or like to let the right one in when the blood's on the floor and she goes down and starts licking it. I got down on my knees and just started playing Baldur's Gate 3. And if not for this live stream, I might have pulled an all-nighter and just kept on going, because I was watching vampire flicks and taking notes all while playing Baldur's Gate 3. And I want to review it, but I need to play enough of it where I get past all the content from the early access mode and into the new content. But the early access takes like 20 hours to clear. Anyway, so hopefully my review for Baldur's Gate 3 will be up soon. But Blasphemous 2, I will definitely be tackling it at the end of the month, because the first one kicked ass. You might have been the one who told me to play it in the first place. Eliadic Stranger writes, most philosophically interesting vampire film. Maybe. I've only seen it once, so I need to revisit it. But I'm thinking probably Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. That has a lot going on there, and it's a little bit more complex. Yeah, I'm hard pressed to think of one that would be kind of have like more facets to explore from a variety of points of view. So that would be my vote for now. I think came out like in 68 or 69, but wild movie. Well worth. I think it's available on the Criterion channel, but definitely through Criterion Collection. Ali writes, thank you for your top 10. Thank you for watching my top 10. I appreciate it. Without y'all watching and your contributions, this channel would not exist. Classified number 1 writes, lastly, how about top 10 best time travel film or series, or anything that has to do with time manipulation? Nolan's Inception, Alex Garland's Devs. I really enjoyed Devs. 12 Monkeys by Terry Gilliam, and Dark. Yeah, I was about to say, if you don't mention Dark, I'm going to have to mention it. I spent so much time covering Dark on this channel, and my 3 most popular videos ever are about Dark. So maybe we should tackle some time travel, but these are a lot of fun to do. So as long as y'all keep watching, I'll keep doing them. AI Pacino writes, I guess Buffy has to be my favorite vampire thing. I think I saw the first 3 seasons, or maybe the first 4 seasons, and then I jumped ahead and watched the musical episode, which I think was in season 6. Yep, Buffy. It's fucking great. But this is I'm much more of a movie guy than a TV guy, so I just decided to leave all TV out of the question. Tom writes, is Mr. Hancock a fan of the 1983 remake of Breathless? Yes, I am. And if you know, I guess if you've been following my channel long enough, I like Breathless from 1983 for the same reasons I like Vampires from 1974. It's just intensely erotic. But I've seen the Jean-Luc Godard original many times over. Oh, I lost my place in line again. This is so annoying how I'll start scrolling and it just goes and it jumps me down to the bottom as if it's doing me some favors. Classified number 1. I've seen you talk about Villeneuve's Dune, Arrival, 2049, but have you seen Incendies? As bleak as it gets, think I Stand Alone by Gaspar Noé, the type of film you only seen once in your life. Yeah, I saw I Stand Alone, and I agree. You see it and you're done. But with the Denis Villeneuve, I think, assuming it doesn't get postponed due to the strike, we're going to definitely have to do a giant Denis Villeneuve live stream where he's got a couple of films in his filmography that I've not seen, and all of them are his early films. So hang on, I'm bringing them up. Incendies from 2010, I did not see. Actually, his first film that I saw, it's going to sound insane, was Sicario in 2015. I haven't seen Enemy. I haven't seen Prisoners. I haven't seen Rated R for Nudity, which is a short, which sounds right up my alley. Before we do the Denis Villeneuve live stream, I will definitely get up to speed. The movies by him that I've seen are Dune, Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, and Sicario. So it sounds like all of his great art house classics are still in front of me, and I look forward to checking out all of them before we tackle them in a live stream. Bob Amara writes, Geeking with Seamus has such a ring. I don't think, yes, Geeking with Seamus. We can totally create a side channel where it's just you and I doing live streams. All right, I think I'm at the bottom. Classify again, off topic, but I'm surprised you never took the time to review Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. It's worth seeing for The Autopsy by David Pryor and The Viewing by Cosmatos. I did see The Viewing by Cosmatos because I fucking love Cosmatos. Or at least I love Mandy. I still need to see Cosmatos' first movie, but it was one of those things where I don't know why I didn't review it. When the hell did that come out? Like right around Christmas? It's sometimes like I miss my window where from a couple days late, it's very hard to go back and play catch up when there's more stuff coming out. And I'm the first to admit that when it comes to tackling new shows and movies and in the appropriate fashion on this channel, I don't always get it right. Sometimes I'm late to the party or I miss my window. So I probably should have reviewed it, but I just I fucked up. I dropped the ball. You're totally right. Tom writes, well, Jim, it's been nice as always. I hope to get fancy Geek with JH badge next to my name on a future stream. Well, I think we can take care of that right now. I'll give out I'm going to give out some more memberships, and because like giving out memberships, I can give out as many as I like because I pay for them, but the money, I mean, apart from like a small percentage goes to YouTube, but the money comes right back to me. So I can give out memberships all day. If you want a membership, I will gladly give them to you because it costs me nothing. And so, yeah, just if you want a membership, just say so, and I will make it happen. Classify once again off topic, but I'm surprised. Oh, sorry, it's the same question. Def Floyd, I dig your style. I dig your style too, and I like the emoji with the shades. I've got some crazy shades I was thinking about wearing for the live stream, but I realized it would make it too hard to read. These are a gift from Terry Osterhout, who does a lot of cool erotic photography. Hunt him down on Twitter, but he's been on Wrong Reel a few times talking about films by like Brigitte Lahaye and things like that. Fred says, Del Toro's Cronos is another great vampire film that doesn't get talked about enough. Yeah, I think it rocks. It's really good, and it's got a completely different kind of version of the mythology and well worth hunting down. David Guy writes, Prisoners is great, and I think I'm at the end. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And yeah, my goal is to do a live stream every week, no matter what, whether it's a top 10 list or something topical or whatever the case might be. But just because of the last Voyager of the Demeter, I was like, fuck it, let's do some vampires. As far as what I should do next week, I have no idea. I'll put on my thinking cap and I'll try to come back with something. But I feel like live streams about the career of a director who has a new movie, or actually, since Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely taking over my brain right now, maybe a live stream about the top 10 RPGs in video game history. But I will try to come up with something interesting that will grab y'all's attention for next week. But I thank you for the recommendations. Thank you for your time. And more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.